Okay, so today we're going to be talking about outlines, specifically the reason for outlines, the purpose that they fulfill in writing your papers, as well as the parts of your paper that are not in your outline, which would be introductions and conclusions. So let's get started. The goal of today is twofold. Understand the role that organization plays in improving the structure of a passage to enhance two things, logic and cohesion. Identify, this is the second goal, to identify effective introductions and conclusions. I want you guys to be able to see an introduction in its native habitat. That's what I hope for today. Okay, so what purpose do introductions and conclusions have? Let's start with introductions. What are some of your ideas? You can Google, tell me what you think, look them up. But what are some ideas? Tell me. What purposes do introductions fulfill? Keep them interested? Good. Yep, so pique their interest. Good. What else? Okay, so literally to introduce the topic. So you bring the reader up to speed, so to say, right? Okay, good. What else? Any more purposes? You guys can Google it, look it up, tell me what you find online. You might find something I didn't think of, and then we can add it to the list. Okay, so it provides a map to what the paper is going to say. So the order in which it's going to make the arguments. Excellent. Good, good. It does do that. Or it can. It can. It doesn't always. I wouldn't say that's necessary. But if you can do it in a succinct way, even subtly, if you can do it in a way that they don't realize it's happening, I feel like that's a good, makes for a good introduction too. Any other ideas? Okay. Introduce the big ideas and the topic. That's the first one in my mind. Like Chloe said, we need to bring the reader up to speed as far as what this paper is going to be about. If you can't just start jumping into Chillingworth is angry because you don't know if the reader doesn't know if you're talking about Chillingworth being angry because that's what your paper's about, or if you're talking about Chillingworth being angry because of something and that's what your paper's about, right? So in order to clarify what exactly the reader is going to be reading, you need to give some kind of topic, and that's going to include big ideas, not super specific, but specific enough that now the reader knows what you're talking about. Once it becomes too specific, then it's going to get too wordy. And besides, that's what your paper is for, not the introduction. So secondly, connect the topic to a context. When I say that, I don't mean that you create the context. In my mind, I picture the introduction as a way for you to connect the reader to the context of the story and a context that they're in. So, for example, the essay we're going to read in a little bit has to do with feminism. Everybody today lives in a context where they have an idea of what feminism is. You understand that there's this word feminism that means, at least you probably do, that means it's an idea that women express trying to say that they are empowered. It could be to vote. It could be to get paid as much as men. It could be that we're just as capable in the army, or whatever it is. There's many different things that you think of when somebody says the word feminism. And you might all think of something similar, but you also might all think of something a little different, especially if your opinions differ about the subject. So, but the point is that you have a context in which you understand the word feminism. When it comes to writing the paper, then, what you need to do is whatever your topic is, let's say your topic is feminism, whatever your topic is, you need to connect your topic to the reader's context so that when they read your paper, they're connecting your ideas to things they already have instilled in their brain. That way they retain it. So when I say connect the topic to a context, I mean take your topic and connect it to big, broad ideas that many people understand so that you can kind of grasp all the readers where they're at and then bring them down to what you're talking about. That's what I'm talking about, connecting a topic to its context. The introduction also must provide the thesis. That's required. So the thesis statement should be in there. I think, Chloe, you mentioned that the the introduction should grab the reader's attention. So it should grab their attention. And it should give a brief summary of the essay. That's what Eve mentioned as far as the order. Like I said, it doesn't necessarily have to provide the order in which the arguments are made, but oftentimes providing a brief summary of the essay can be beneficial in the introduction if it's done correctly. Okay, what are some purposes for the conclusions? Okay, wrap up. Good. Wrap up. You said wrap up what? Okay. Yep. So wrap up what it was you were saying in your essay. Okay, so to restate the main argument or the thesis. Good. What else? Okay, so repeating some evidence. Good. Good. Those are all good things. Wrap up ideas. Conclusions definitely need to bring things to a close. So wrapping it up. Restating the argument, although we're going to get to restating the argument in detail later. And what I mean by that exactly, because I think there's some specific ways to do it right and to do it in a not so high quality way. Conclusions also remind readers of the argument's strengths, so you might go over what the specific evidence was, or you might refer to it, right? You don't have to restate it exactly. Then the word choice, the use of language that you have in conclusion is going to be different than in the introduction. It needs to use conclusive and assertive language. Your whole essay should be assertive. I mean, it's a persuasive essay arguing for some thesis that you've written because you believe this thesis to be true and you're trying to prove it. So the whole essay should be assertive, but especially the conclusion. Not necessarily extra assertive, but don't leave that assertive quality out of the conclusion or it won't sound very conclusive. Okay, so let's talk about introductions. Introductions are not part of the outline. So when we think of our thesis and then we thought of our outline, it's very important that you understand your outline should not be introduction, body, conclusion. Now, I mean, that is an outline, and I know I was taught that in high school because it can serve a function. However, that's not what I'm looking for. Your outlines, the specific purpose is to organize the structure of your essay, which is going to be the body of your essay. The introduction and the conclusion is a given, so it's not part of the outline. Introductions are necessary for providing structure to the essay and the argument. So in order to provide bookends, beginning and an end, that's a major part of providing structure and organization to your argument. And your argument that you're making in the essay will be that much stronger for the structure that you build into the essay. Okay. Oh, my mistake. Introductions are like funnels. I want to talk about what that means. So let's look at this picture. The triangle is upside down. It's like a funnel, like an oil changing funnel, or a baking funnel. And an introduction is like a funnel because at the beginning, you're starting the introduction with broad ideas, big ideas, interesting hook, right? You want to right away start with something that's going to grab their interest. You're providing contextual info, which we talked about, connecting your topic with ideas the reader or your reader you think would already be familiar with, so that they have a connection. You're providing context as far as what's happening, some broad, relevant scenarios, maybe historical events, relevant statistics, things like that, in order to create a context so that what you say in your topic, about your topic, is relevant. And then maybe a brief summary or argument. However, the thesis statement that we said is required in the introduction should be the last sentence of your introduction. So that's why it's at the bottom. It's at the bottom of the funnel because, one, the top of the funnel is very broad, basic, general ideas. The bottom of the funnel is the most specific statement in your essay. You should spend a lot of time thinking through your thesis statement and wording it so perfectly. And oftentimes you'll spend as much time on your thesis statement as you will editing your paper after, because it's so integral to a high quality essay. Your thesis statement needs to be very precise. We talked about the characteristics of a thesis statement. They're clear, concise, precise, assertive, and debatable. So your thesis statement needs to be very clear, very precise, very short, or as short as possible for what you're trying to say. And the bigger the paper, sometimes the bigger the thesis, but not necessarily. But your thesis statement is going to be the last sentence of your introduction because it's gathering all that information and bringing it down to a single specific point. Your topic is even more general because you could think of other thesis statements to write about your topic. So your thesis statement is getting down to the very specific aspect of what you are going to be talking about concerning your topic. So that's why it's at the bottom of the funnel, because everything comes to that point, and then it spreads out after that. Okay, if you think of it like an engine, the oil goes in, comes to the point here, and then it goes throughout all the engine wherever it goes. And that's what we're trying to do. Okay, so what is cohesion? If you remember from the first slide, cohesion is something that I mentioned we're going to talk about when we talk about introductions, because cohesion is necessary for a quality paper. If you're going to have a good essay, it needs to have cohesion. And creating an outline first is the tool that you use in order to create good cohesion in your paper. So what is cohesion? Cohesion is the act or fact of forming a united whole. So taking all the parts, piecing them together in a logical order, so that when you're done piecing them together, what you have is one united whole. And it starts with a thesis. If you don't form a thesis, then you are likely to write your essay about many things. But by starting with a thesis, everything in your paper should be written about your thesis. And so you begin creating cohesion with your thesis statement because you've specified what I'm talking about in your thesis, and then things that you talk about in your paper that are irrelevant to your thesis, you cut out. So that at the end of your essay, you have one united whole surrounding your thesis statement. However, your outline is also important because your outline is going to break down your thesis and explain all the parts of your essay in the order that they're going to say. So both the thesis and the outline are very important when trying to make sure your essay has cohesion. So introductions are not part of the outline. They're necessary for providing structure to the essay and the argument. Introductions are like funnels. And then creating cohesion in outlines means taking all the pieces of information you brainstormed and organizing them into the most logical order to support your argument. Once you have your thesis statement, then you build your essay. So this is a diagram of what your outline is doing. At this point, there are a bunch of pieces, and they're all over the page, but they're all in an order, right? So I've got my first point supported by evidence, my second point supported by evidence, and my third point supported by evidence. Each of those are all supporting the subpoints, which all supports the thesis. So that what is that, 7 points on the bottom, all 7 supporting evidence and arguments at the bottom, they are all distinct. They're different. They're not saying the same thing over and over again. However, they are all supporting your thesis statement in 7 different ways. And so because they're all specifically supporting the thesis statement in some way, in this case, one of 3 ways, they are all relevant to the thesis statement and thus cohesion, because it's one piece. It's all directly linked to the thesis statement. So introductions, thesis, and the body. Introductions include general information and end with a thesis. Like we said, the thesis needs to be the last sentence in the introduction. The thesis should be a single sentence. It needs to be, that's part of being concise, right? Clear, concise, precise, assertive, and debatable. The body of the paper expounds the point stated in the thesis. So whatever point you're trying to make in your thesis statement, the body of the paper is explaining and expounding on what your thesis is asserting. Outlines an introduction, outlines the detail. Outlines the outlines that you write. Outlines detail the order your paper will make its argument. So outlines are going to lay out in what order you make your argument. And that order needs to be logical. It would make sense if it was chronological. Sometimes things that you're talking about, like let's say you're going to make an argument for Chillingworth and how he develops as a character. You would want to talk about events in his life that made a difference, but you would talk about them in order. It wouldn't make sense to talk about Chillingworth at the end of the book, and then in the beginning of the book, and then the middle of the book. That's illogical. We would want it to be chronological. So, outlines detail the order your paper will make its argument. And then the thesis is a door because it's opening up the rest of what your paper is going to be about. Yeah, sure. I'm about to say. I had my notes, but I didn't have them up, so. Yes, okay, the thesis is a door. The thesis is a door because the thesis acts as a turning point or a door leading from general information into the specifics of your paper. So rather than being like a funnel, if you think of the thesis statement as the entry point to the house, whereas from outside, there are lots of things we could talk about, but then you go into the house and you're specifically in a specific house. In this case, you're under a specific topic. The thesis statement is the entry point to that specific point that you're making. And from there, you can go anywhere in the house. You've got lots of places to go. You've got point 1, point 2, point 3, and each point has its own supporting evidence. So there are lots of places that you will go in your paper as a reader once you enter the door through the thesis statement. So in that sense, the thesis is a door, whereas the introduction is a funnel. Does that make sense now? Okay. So let's talk about conclusions. Conclusions are not part of the outline either. So like I said, your outline, when you write your outline, it needs to be based on, your outline needs to be points that you've made that are based on your thesis. Your introduction and conclusion do not appear in your outline because it's just a given. You have to have those as bookends to your paper, so there's no need to mention in your outline introduction and then body, and then point A of body is your main point. That would be unnecessary. So outlines do not include conclusions. They're not part of the outline. Both intros and conclusions are a given. They're simply assumed to be required and should not be included in the outline that details the argument. Because the outline is detailing the argument. It's not detailing that it has an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. Okay, next. Necessary for being persuasive. A conclusion must be included in the essay if you're trying to be persuasive. Necessary, if you don't end with statements that wrap up and summarize, then the reader will be left feeling like there's more to be read, which is not the feeling a writer wants when trying to persuade them of a conclusion. You can't persuade someone to come to the same conclusion you have concerning your topic if you don't actually conclude anything. And that's where the word conclusion comes for why we call something at the end of a paper a conclusion. Because you've come to a conclusion, right? Sometimes we think of the word conclusion in the sense that you're closing something, and in another sense it's like I have come to an opinion based on evidence. Like I concluded something. They're very related when it comes to the conclusion of an essay. Okay, next. Having cohesion means concluding something. So coming to a conclusion based on the evidence you've provided. Your conclusion must be relevant by being directly based on your argument. Often people advise restating the thesis in the conclusion, which is what Eve mentioned. And I mentioned when you said that we're going to talk about it, and this is that point. Often people advise restating the thesis in the conclusion. This is because the thesis, in a sense, is the conclusion. When you say your thesis at the beginning of a paper, you are telling the reader, this is what this paper is concluding. It's the point that it's coming to. You're trying to prove your thesis, so in essence, you are wanting the reader to conclude that your thesis is true. However, it's uncouth to simply copy and paste your thesis into the conclusion. So use creativity to reference your thesis, reference the arguments you made, and referencing the evidence you used to support it, etc. Don't just copy and paste your thesis, but get creative in how you refer to your thesis in the conclusion. Then there's more. There's not last. The conclusion uses language with a sense of finality. Be careful with your word choice in the conclusion in order to cause emotions in the reader concerning the essay that it's coming to a close. But also be careful not to direct the reader away from your paper in an effort to do this, which leads me to the last point. Do not include any new information in your conclusion. If you do, it's going to make the reader feel like there's more to be said, which is the opposite of an ending feeling in your conclusion. So you must not include any new information or refer to new information. You might not actually say anything new, but refer to like further evidence that could have been researched or other opinions that were not discussed in the paper. Those are the kinds of things that you would want to say in your paper in a section that talks about other opinions. And you can say there are other opinions that are not discussed here, but it's not something you want to say in the conclusion because it'll make the reader feel like you're going somewhere and then it's all of a sudden it's over. And that's not what you want them to feel like at the end of a conclusion. It'll directly hinder your effort to come to a close and will leave the reader hanging. So, I had a glitch. Okay, so here's our activity. I want you to go online, and Google this. Literary essay, Scarlet Letter. And I think like the third one down, you should find a SparkNotes A+ essay. You won't see it up there. But go ahead and look for it. And then we're going to do this activity. I want you to, before you read the whole essay, first just read the introduction. And tell me where you think the introduction begins and ends. what portion of the introduction is the thesis, and what does the introduction do well? What are some things, based on what we just learned, what are some characteristic or quality traits of this introduction for the essay that we're looking at that make it a good introduction? Why does SparkNotes say it's an A+ essay? And then after, I want you to read the whole essay, and based on the thesis having read the essay, I want you to write what you think the author's outline would have been. But we'll do that after we discuss the quality traits of the good introduction.